The city streets were slick from the rain that had fallen steadily all evening, reflecting the neon signs from shops and restaurants in shimmering puddles. Inside the towering offices of Cole Enterprises, Mara Bennett maneuvered her cleaning cart quietly down the long, polished hallways. Her uniform was simple and worn, her hair tied back tightly, and her eyes sharp, scanning every corner for dust, fingerprints, and unnoticed spills. To everyone else, she was invisible, a night shift cleaner, a worker who swept the floors and emptied trash bins, and nothing more. Yet Mara's mind was far from idle. Once a promising accountant, her career had ended abruptly due to a scandal that forced her to leave the corporate world behind. The discipline, analytical skills, and attention to detail she had developed in her previous life remained, sharpened even by hardship. As she passed the CEO's office, her eyes fell on a stack of papers left haphazardly on his polished mahogany desk. Most people would have ignored them. After all, she was just a cleaner, but Mara's instincts told her otherwise. She crouched slightly, picking up a sheet to examine it under the warm overhead light. Her heart quickened. Among the merger contracts and standard reports, one document stood out. Embedded deep within the fine print was a clause so subtle that it could easily escape notice, yet powerful enough to jeopardize the entire company if signed without caution. Mara's sharp mind traced the numbers, recalculated the projections, and her chest tightened as the implications became clear. This was a corporate trap, designed to mislead the CEO into a decision that could devastate the company. At that moment, the office door opened quietly, and Adrian Cole, 40, entered. The self-made CEO was a man consumed by his work, often trusting people too readily, and notoriously unaware of threats hidden in plain sight. He barely glanced at Mara. "Mara, what are you doing here?" "Stick to your cleaning," he said, dismissing her in a tone both curt and indifferent. Mara stood her ground, her voice steady despite the nervous flutter in her chest. "Sir, I noticed something in the merger contract. There's a clause here that could risk the company if signed as is. I've recalculated the numbers, checked the projections. Please, you need to see this." Adrian's assistant peeked around the corner, whispering something. Adrian's eyes narrowed. "I said leave it. You're a cleaner. Business isn't your concern." Humiliation swept over Mara, but she refused to step back. She had come too far, and the consequences of inaction were too severe. Even as Adrian and the staff turned their eyes away, muttering dismissively, she steeled herself. "I'm not doing this for recognition," she said quietly. "I just want to prevent a disaster." As Adrian left for the evening, Mara quietly returned. Her determination had not wavered. She slipped an anonymous note onto his desk, a detailed analysis of the risky clause, her recalculated figures, and step-by-step explanations. She stayed late into the night, double-checking calculations, reviewing every part of the contract to ensure that the proof could not be ignored. The hours stretched on, the polished floors reflecting the soft glow of the desk lamps. Mara worked silently, methodically, her mind alive with calculations and contingencies. She understood the stakes. If Adrian signed the contract blindly, the company could face financial ruin. And while everyone else ignored her, she had the expertise and courage to intervene. Meanwhile, Vivian Hart, 35, Adrian's ex-fiancée, and now an executive in a rival company, watched from afar. Her plan was meticulous. Use her influence to manipulate the merger contract, hiding a clause that would secretly harm Adrian's company. Her motives were personal: revenge, old resentment, and the desire to regain leverage. She did not anticipate that a lowly night shift cleaner, dismissed by everyone, would notice the flaw, understand its implications, and take steps to prevent disaster. Mara, the overlooked employee, had now become the unseen guardian of the company's fate. The irony was not lost on her. Those who had sneered at her now had no idea that her diligence and expertise were the very things that could save the empire Adrian had built. As dawn approached, Adrian arrived early, preparing for the board meeting where the merger would be signed. His eyes scanned the envelope that had been left anonymously on his desk. The highlighted points, clear notes, and annotations immediately caught his attention. Numbers that once seemed balanced now appeared dangerous, and the hidden clause stood out starkly. He leaned back, frowning, piecing together the situation. Someone had intervened, someone with knowledge and skill enough to prevent a disaster. He did not yet know who, but the seed of doubt had been planted. Adrian realized that his ex-fiancée's influence might be behind the contract's dangerous design, and that whoever had corrected it had acted with intention, knowledge, and courage. Mara returned to her cleaning, silently observing the office, ensuring that everything was in order. Her presence remained unnoticed, yet she knew she had already changed the course of events. She had discovered a hidden threat, warned the CEO, even if anonymously, and prepared the ground for exposing Vivienne's plot. The city outside woke slowly, unaware that within the walls of Cole Enterprises, a quiet battle of intellect, courage, and foresight had begun. Mara, invisible to most, had just become the critical pivot on which the company's fate balanced. And as the sun began to rise, she paused for a moment at Adrian's office door, the envelope still resting on his desk, and whispered to herself, "Sometimes, the smallest actions can prevent the greatest disasters." The next morning, the city was just beginning to stir, the streets glistening from last night's rain. Adrian Cole arrived at his office early, coffee in hand, his mind occupied with the upcoming board meeting. The merger contract still lay on his desk, and for the first time he noticed something unusual. There was an envelope, neatly placed, unsigned, with notes, highlighted clauses, and recalculations meticulously detailed. Adrian picked it up, frowning as his eyes scanned the contents. The numbers were precise, and the risk was clear. The hidden clause Mara had discovered could have destroyed the company if left unchecked. For the first time in years, Adrian felt a chill that wasn't from the morning air. It was the realization that someone had intervened, someone who understood the nuances of the contract, and someone who had seen what even he had missed. Meanwhile, Mara Bennett arrived for her night shift at the diner, unaware of the impact her anonymous warning had made. She moved quietly, stacking trays, wiping counters, and keeping her presence unnoticed. Her thoughts drifted back to Adrian, the contract, and the subtle thrill of knowing she had potentially saved the company from disaster. She smiled faintly, imagining the CEO reading her notes, though he did not yet know who she was. Back in the office, Adrian began piecing together the logic behind the calculations. Each annotation, each highlighted warning, revealed a depth of knowledge that went far beyond what a typical cleaning staff member would have. He paused, considering the possibilities. Had one of his trusted executives noticed this anomaly? Or had someone completely unexpected intervened? As the morning progressed, the board members started arriving. The office was alive with quiet murmurs and the shuffle of papers, but Adrian's attention remained fixed on the envelope and the documents it contained. He realized that if he had signed the merger blindly, the clause would have activated, transferring significant liabilities to his company and jeopardizing months of strategic planning. The thought made his jaw tighten. At the same time, Vivienne Hart, Adrian's ex-fiancée, and now a rival executive, was monitoring the situation from her office across the city. She had orchestrated the hidden clause carefully, using her influence and network to make it seem legitimate. Her plan was elegant, relying on the CEO's trust and the board's obliviousness. Vivienne believed she had created the perfect trap, but she had underestimated the quiet diligence of a single night shift cleaner with a sharp mind. Mara, unaware of Vivienne's machinations, returned to Adrian's office late that evening, cleaning as usual. She moved methodically, dusting, wiping, organizing, but her eyes constantly returned to the contract. She noticed that the signature lines were still blank. She smiled quietly. Her anonymous notes had bought enough time for Adrian to realize the danger. The tension was palpable. Adrian, armed with Mara's analysis, now understood that the merger contract carried hidden perils. He began calling in trusted legal advisors, comparing the notes with his team's projections. Slowly, the pieces fell into place. The calculations aligned perfectly with Mara's warnings. Someone with expertise, someone observant, had intervened. Vivienne, confident that Adrian would sign, arrived at the office to personally ensure the merger went through. She entered the boardroom, her expression carefully neutral, hiding her anticipation. Adrian looked up, noticing her presence. Her eyes flicked toward the contract, and she smiled faintly, attempting to mask the tension. But Adrian did not sign. Instead, he held the envelope, rereading the carefully annotated notes, the hidden clause, the financial risks, the red flags. All of them were now undeniable. His mind raced, realizing that the anonymous warning had saved him from potentially catastrophic consequences. Meanwhile, Mara continued her cleaning quietly, unaware of the growing storm. She paused to look at the boardroom from a distance, sensing that something monumental was unfolding. Her heart raced, not from fear, but from anticipation. She had acted without recognition, without expectation, yet she felt the quiet thrill of knowing her knowledge had made a difference. Adrian stood, calling his team together. "We will postpone the signing until we verify every clause. There's something here that someone has tried to hide," he said, his voice firm. The board members glanced at each other, murmuring, confusion and curiosity spreading through the room. Vivienne's expression tightened. Her plan was unraveling before her eyes. The subtle confidence she had relied upon was slipping, and she realized that whoever had left the warning had outmaneuvered her in secrecy. Her fingers twitched, clutching the contract, But it was too late. The momentum had shifted. That evening, Adrian returned to his office after the day's meetings, sitting alone with the documents. The sun had set, casting long shadows across the floor. He studied the annotations, recalculated the numbers, and realized the depth of understanding behind the notes. The handwriting was precise, methodical, professional. Whoever had intervened knew what they were doing. The realization struck him suddenly. The intervention had come from someone entirely unexpected, someone he had overlooked, dismissed, and underestimated. And yet, that person had saved the company from disaster. As Adrian leaned back in his chair, he reflected on the irony. The invisible cleaner, the person everyone ignored, had outwitted the seasoned executives and the manipulative ex-fiancée. The thought made him both humbled and intrigued. He realized he needed to discover the identity of the person responsible, not just for gratitude, but because their intellect and courage demanded recognition. Meanwhile, Mara continued her night shift at the diner, finishing her duties with quiet efficiency. Outside, the city lights shimmered on wet asphalt, reflecting a world oblivious to the unseen battles fought inside office towers and corporate suites. She did not know that the CEO had noticed her work, not as a cleaner, but as a guardian of his company's future. The stage was now set. The trap had been avoided, Vivienne's intentions had been thwarted, though she remained unaware, and Adrian's curiosity about the mysterious intervention grew with each passing moment. The silent cleaner had begun a journey that would soon bring recognition, confrontation, and an intricate dance of strategy, courage, and slow-burning trust. The boardroom was tense, bathed in the cold light of the early morning. Adrian Cole, CEO of Cole Enterprises, sat at the head of the table, the contract and annotated notes before him. The anonymous envelope he had discovered the previous night had saved the company from a disastrous merger clause, but the mystery of the person behind it remained. His sharp mind pieced together the details. The calculations, the meticulous annotations, the highlighting, they all indicated someone with expertise far beyond what a typical employee could have. Adrian's gaze shifted to the staff who were present for the board's preliminary discussion. Whispers circulated quietly. Who could have left such a note? Several junior analysts shook their heads, perplexed. Even seasoned managers admitted they had never seen anything so detailed. Yet, it was clear, someone had intervened intentionally to prevent corporate disaster. Meanwhile, Mara Bennett continued her night shift quietly, unaware that Adrian was analyzing her work. She moved down the halls, dusting and wiping surfaces, a faint sense of anticipation in her chest. She didn't know if her anonymous warning had been seen or acted upon, but she had done what she could, and that was enough for now. At that moment, Vivienne Hart, Adrian's ex-fiancée, and now rival executive, entered the office suite. Her expression was a carefully controlled mask of calm, but behind it, tension and calculation lurked. She believed her hidden clause would compel Adrian to sign the merger blindly, furthering her plan for corporate leverage. What she did not anticipate was that someone from within the office had uncovered her manipulations. Adrian called a private meeting with Vivienne, his tone measured, professional, yet carrying the weight of suspicion. "Vivienne," he began, "I've noticed several discrepancies in the merger documents. Certain clauses, certain projections, they do not align. Can you explain these anomalies?" Vivienne's eyes widened fractionally, the first flicker of uncertainty passing across her composed face. "Adrian, I assure you, everything is perfectly legitimate," she replied smoothly. Yet Adrian's gaze was unwavering, sharp, and increasingly analytical. Across the office, Mara paused near a window, wiping condensation from the glass. She sensed the tension escalating, though she remained unseen. Her work had set a chain of events into motion that neither Adrian nor Vivienne could have anticipated. Adrian examined the contract further. Each annotation, each highlighted risk, each recalculated projection matched the analysis he had seen in the envelope. The sophistication of the work was undeniable, and for the first time Adrian considered that the person who had left it might not be an executive, or even someone on the board, but someone with knowledge, skill, and courage beyond expectation. Vivienne leaned forward, attempting to influence the situation. "Adrian, you can trust me. This merger is beneficial. The numbers are sound," she said, her voice both persuasive and subtly manipulative. Her eyes flicked toward the envelope, though she did not know its origin. Adrian's mind raced. He traced the calculations, noting subtle corrections and logical deductions that no casual employee could have made. Then, for a brief moment, the realization struck him. The person who had intervened had intimate knowledge of accounting and financial strategy, combined with meticulous attention to detail. The handwriting, the formatting, and the clarity all pointed to a professional trained in the field, yet someone who would remain unnoticed. He thought back to the cleaner, Mara Bennett, whom he had dismissed in the past week for attempting to point out an error. Could it be her? The idea seemed almost impossible, yet every clue, the depth of analysis, the knowledge of risk, pointed in that direction. Adrian's curiosity and growing respect mingled with disbelief. Meanwhile, Vivienne sensed that her control was slipping. The board members were beginning to ask questions, comparing notes and projections. The inconsistencies she had relied on to manipulate Adrian's decision were being exposed before her very eyes. Her carefully laid plans threatened to collapse. Adrian, now certain, summoned Mara quietly to his office under a pretense. She entered cautiously, expecting perhaps a reprimand, yet was met with a measured, calm gaze. "Mara," Adrian began, "I need to know, did you leave the notes on my desk?" Mara's eyes widened, her pulse quickening. I didn't mean to interfere, sir. I noticed something wrong. The contract, it could ruin the company if signed blindly. I had to do something." Adrian studied her, noting the confidence and intelligence in her demeanor. "These annotations," he said, holding the documents, "they're precise, professional, the kind of work I never expected from a cleaner. Yet they are correct. You saved the company." Mara's face flushed. She had never sought recognition, only to prevent a disaster. Yet here she was, standing before the CEO, being acknowledged in a way that contrasted sharply with the humiliation she had faced days before. Adrian turned his attention back to the contract. "And Vivienne?" he asked softly, his gaze sharp. "She had a hand in this, didn't she?" Mara nodded subtly. "I suspected, yes. She designed the hidden clause. I couldn't let it go through." The revelation hit Adrian with force. The woman he had once trusted, once loved, had tried to manipulate the company for her own gain. And yet, the person he had dismissed as invisible, a cleaner, had prevented the disaster. The irony and justice of the situation were not lost on him. The boardroom, once filled with quiet anticipation and corporate formality, now held a charged atmosphere. The lines between authority, skill, and insight had blurred. The cleaner, once dismissed and humiliated, was now the unseen hero who had safeguarded the company from ruin. Adrian's respect for Mara grew, tempered with awe at her intelligence and courage. He realized that trust, judgment, and recognition were not defined by title or appearance. And as Vivienne's influence began to falter, the stage was set for the next move, a confrontation, a reveal of betrayal, and the ultimate resolution that would redefine relationships, power, and respect within the company. The boardroom was alive with tension, the morning sun reflecting sharply off the polished mahogany table. Adrian Cole entered first, his eyes scanning the room with precise focus. Board members shuffled nervously, aware that today's meeting would determine the fate of the upcoming merger. The contract sat in the center, the envelope Mara had left overnight still unopened on his desk. Vivienne Hart arrived next, composed, elegant, but with a subtle hardness in her gaze. She had spent months planning this corporate maneuver, relying on her charm and influence to push Adrian into signing the merger without noticing the hidden clause. But now, uncertainty flickered across her face. The anonymous warning had already started unraveling her meticulous plan. Adrian began the meeting, his voice calm but commanding. "We are here to review the proposed merger. However, before any signatures are applied, there is information that must be considered." He picked up the envelope, holding it deliberately, drawing the attention of every board member. "This material was brought to my attention overnight. It exposes a hidden clause in the contract that could severely compromise the company." Vivienne's composure wavered, just slightly, as she realized the weight of Adrian's words. Whispers traveled around the room, and the board members leaned in, curious and apprehensive. The previously smooth path she had created for the merger was now blocked. Adrian methodically laid out the details, presenting calculations, risk analyses, and annotations that highlighted the dangers she had tried to conceal. His tone was factual, precise, leaving no room for manipulation. Every board member could see the discrepancy, and it became immediately clear. Someone with detailed knowledge had intervened. Mara, quietly observing from the hallway outside, felt a mixture of apprehension and satisfaction. She had left the proof anonymously, not seeking recognition, only to prevent the company from disaster. Yet now, seeing Adrian's deliberate handling of the situation, she realized her actions were about to make a difference on a scale she had never imagined. Vivienne rose, attempting to salvage her plan. "Adrian, I assure you, these concerns are unfounded. The clause is standard, and there's no risk to the company," she said, her tone polished but strained. Adrian looked directly at her, his gaze sharp. "Standard? Or strategically placed to exploit oversight?" The numbers do not lie, the risk is real, and someone within this office has corrected the calculations before they could cause harm. His words carried weight, leaving Vivienne momentarily speechless. He turned slightly, addressing the board. The intervention was precise, methodical, and undeniably accurate. Whoever did this acted to protect the company, despite being underestimated by those around them. The implication was clear. Mara, invisible to most, was the unseen hero of the day. Board members began nodding, murmuring quietly. Some glanced at Vivienne, whose confidence was visibly shaken. Her plan to manipulate the signing had collapsed, her credibility now in question. The very people she intended to deceive had already seen the evidence, thanks to Mara's anonymous but brilliant intervention. Adrian continued, methodically presenting each risk and correction. It is evident that those who can recognize detail and act with courage are not always in positions of authority, he said, emphasizing the moral of the moment. Merit and insight cannot be ignored, regardless of title or status. Vivienne tried one last attempt to sway the board. You cannot seriously consider this anonymous submission. There is no way to verify it, she said, but the strength of the evidence left no room for doubt. The board collectively recognized the brilliance behind the notes and the foresight that prevented the company from potential ruin. Finally, Adrian concluded, "We will postpone the signing until full verification, and I intend to discover the individual responsible. This company relies on integrity and intelligence, not manipulation and deceit." Mara, watching silently, allowed herself a brief smile. She had acted not for recognition, not for reward, but to ensure justice and prevent disaster. Adrian's acknowledgement, even without knowing her identity, validated her courage and expertise. Vivienne, humiliated, realized that her carefully planned deception had failed. Her scheme had not only collapsed, but the credit for the intervention had gone to someone she had deemed unimportant. The irony was sharp, and for the first time in the meeting, she felt the sting of being outmaneuvered. As the boardroom emptied, Adrian leaned back in his chair, reviewing the documents once more. He was determined to uncover the identity of the person who had protected the company. Mara's intellect, diligence, and courage had already saved the day. Now, it was only a matter of time before her contribution would be revealed and appropriately recognized. The corporate battlefield had shifted. The unseen had outwitted the influential. The cleverness of a humble cleaner had surpassed the schemes of an ex-fiancée. And as the city outside shimmered under the afternoon sun, the stage was set for the final resolution, recognition, justice, and perhaps the first hints of trust and admiration that could grow into something more between Mara and Adrian. The boardroom buzzed with anticipation as Adrian Cole prepared to address the team. The fraudulent merger clause had been revealed, thanks to the anonymous notes that had corrected the numbers and exposed hidden risks. Vivienne Hart, once poised and confident, now sat quietly, realizing her manipulative scheme had been foiled. The evidence was undeniable. She had attempted to exploit the CEO's trust, and now her plans had collapsed spectacularly. Adrian cleared his throat, projecting calm authority. Today, we acknowledge the events that nearly compromised this company, but thanks to the intervention of someone incredibly perceptive, we have prevented a catastrophe. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the room. The person responsible noticed what the rest of us overlooked, acted without expectation, and safeguarded the company. Their courage and expertise cannot go unrecognized. Whispers spread across the boardroom. The employees exchanged curious glances, trying to guess who could have acted so skillfully. Mara Bennett, standing quietly at the back, felt her chest tighten. She had never sought recognition, yet here it was being hinted at, her anonymous work about to be revealed. Adrian continued, his gaze scanning the room with precision. The individual behind this intervention has shown intelligence, dedication, and integrity far beyond what anyone could expect. They have earned my respect, and they will be rewarded appropriately. Vivienne shifted uneasily in her seat. The board's attention was slowly turning toward Mara, the previously invisible cleaner whose intellect had outmaneuvered not only the seasoned executives, but also Vivienne herself. Adrian gestured toward Mara. "Mara Bennett, would you please come forward?" Mara hesitated, then stepped into the center of the room. Eyes widened, whispers increased. The very employees who had dismissed her as just a cleaner now looked at her with awe and respect. Adrian handed her the folder containing the evidence she had left anonymously, confirming her meticulous work. "You saved this company," Adrian said sincerely, his voice steady. "Not through position, not through title, but through knowledge, courage, and persistence. Effective immediately, I would like to offer you a permanent position in the finance and strategy department, where your skills can be fully utilized." Mara's eyes glistened. I I never expected. Thank you, sir, she said softly, humility and pride mingling in her voice. She realized that her perseverance, despite dismissal and humiliation, had finally been acknowledged. Vivienne, on the other hand, faced the consequences of her actions. Adrian addressed her directly. Vivienne, your scheme has been uncovered. The contract has been corrected, and your attempt to manipulate this company for personal gain is now on record. Vivienne's face flushed with guilt. I misjudged everything, she admitted quietly. I let old feelings cloud my judgment. I never intended to cause harm, but I realize now that I betrayed trust. She stood, facing the board. I resign from my position. The company deserves integrity, and I cannot provide that after my actions. The board members murmured their approval. Justice had been served, but unlike previous stories of absolute ruin, Vivienne retained a path to redemption, her departure dignified yet accountable. With Vivienne gone, the atmosphere shifted. Adrian turned back to Mara, a subtle warmth in his expression. Over the next weeks, Mara's position in the company allowed her to demonstrate her brilliance. She worked closely with Adrian, providing insights, spotting risks, and contributing to decisions with precision and clarity. Their professional relationship blossomed gradually into mutual respect, trust, and then something deeper, a slow-burning connection, founded not on power or influence, but on admiration and integrity. One evening, as the office lights dimmed and the city skyline twinkled outside, Adrian approached Mara at her desk. You've exceeded every expectation, he said softly. I don't just respect your skill, I admire your courage. Mara smiled faintly, a warmth in her chest. I only did what was right, she replied. Adrian extended his hand, hesitating slightly, a subtle invitation in his eyes. Sometimes the right person shows up in the right moment, even when invisible. I'd like to see where this goes. Mara accepted the gesture, feeling a quiet thrill. It was tentative, slow, respectful, but it carried the promise of trust, companionship, and perhaps love. The story concluded with justice served, a company saved, the unseen hero recognized, and a subtle romantic connection beginning to bloom between Mara and Adrian. Vivienne, having acknowledged her mistakes, left with a sense of redemption, her actions corrected but her ambition intact, offering a different tone from stories where villains are destroyed completely. Outside the office, the city continued its rhythm, oblivious to the battles fought within the walls, yet the lives of those involved had been forever altered. Mara no longer invisible, Adrian wiser and more discerning, and a bond formed through courage, intelligence, and integrity that neither would forget.